Good evening, afternoon, morning, depending on wherever you are in the world, and welcome to this webinar on buying a property in France. I'm Emily Despois. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Fine&Country, and I will be your host today. Before we get on to introducing all these wonderful panel of experts, let me remind you that we have received some questions from you, which I will be asking the panel of experts, but there is also a live chat where you can leave your questions and I will do my best to get onto those as well during this hour that we've got together. If I can't, unfortunately, because we just have an hour, we will make sure that we're sharing your questions with the panel and they will get back to you after the webinar. The recording will also be available. So that's it from me, and let's get onto the panel. So Alice, do you want to maybe introduce yourself, the company you're working for, and maybe what you like about France, what gets you excited about France?
With pleasure. Thank you, Emily, and to all the other panelists who are here and those who are watching live. It's great to be doing this again. We did it in the spring and it's great to be doing it again this autumn. So my name is Alice Watson-Smith. I'm the Managing Director of Fine&Country on the French Riviera and have been here for 11 years working in real estate, almost 12 in fact, in France. And I worked for 4 years in real estate before that in Cape Town. So very different markets, but I have a lot of experience now in the French real estate market. And I'm very happy to be sharing that with all of you tonight. Any other questions can come afterwards. And gosh, what a good question, Emily. What do I love about living in France? I just actually love it all. I've lived in quite a few places around the world, and I must say we're very, very lucky to be living in the south of France, where I do in Cannes, with good weather, good food, good people, good sunshine. It could be worse, and beautiful properties, of course. So it could be worse. And yeah, that's it from me. I will pass on to the next person.
Thank you very much. Then Liam, over to you.
Emily, thank you. So I am the founder of Fortier Finance. We are a fully regulated and authorized French mortgage broking company with an office in Nice. We are specialists for non-residents only. My experience and background is I've been doing this now for almost a decade, so I would say quite well placed and geographically in the right spot to help our international clients. One of the things that I enjoy about living in France is you get the best of every season. Ski or la plage, as we like to say. Do you go skiing or do you go to the beach? So living in Nice, you know, we have, I would say, a short journey of 1 hour and 30 minutes, and you can be in the French Alps or you can be at the beach. So yeah, from lifestyle reasons, fantastic.
That sounds absolutely amazing. Thank you very much, Liam. Tracy, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thanks, Emily, for the introduction. So my name is Tracy Leonetti. I'm a relocation expert. I've been based in the south of France, so not far from Liam and from Alice as well, for the last 30 years. So LBS, I founded it in 2012, and our aim is really to help people who are moving, living, or creating a business in France, and we help them with their paperwork footprints. So what does that mean? It means we help you with anything from visas to healthcare, residency cards, car registrations, driving licenses, basically you name it, we do it. We've been doing that for well over 12 years, so we're very well placed to help you with any questions you have this evening. Really looking forward to answering them. And what do I love about France? Well, I've been here for 30 years and I've travelled quite extensively before that. I've been living in Australia, New Zealand, Bermuda I worked, so I've visited quite a lot of places. And what I love about France, I think it's the culture. I just love the outside culture. I love the idea, like Liam said, you can pretty much go anywhere you want. But obviously, as we said a bit earlier, the wine and the cheese does tend to help us as well. We like that. But I think just walking down and having a coffee in the morning is my ultimate pleasure. And over 30 years, it has never, ever gone away.
I mean, France is obviously my home country. You make me miss it now. Thomas, over to you.
Evening, everybody. So I'm one of the partners at Blevins Franks. We provide strategic tax and financial planning to French residents, all those who are looking to become French residents. We're not a new company. Next year will mark 50 years since the company started. Coincidentally, it will also mark 10 years since I joined the company. When we use the term strategic tax and financial planning, the objective is really to look at a person's current situation and provide them with a plan as to how they can optimise French taxation. Quite often we're advising people who are still in the UK or living outside of France. And the idea is really to give them a roadmap, a step-by-step guide as to how they can optimise for the French system. And we look at all aspects: inheritance, capital gains tax, pensions, investments, income tax, wealth tax. And really we're looking at how we can minimise the effect of all of those to make the dream of living in France a reality. I suppose in terms of what I love about France, I often think that I could be sat on the M25 in rain driving to work, but instead I'm cycling past vineyards in the sun, and it's just a nice way of life. I actually like the French as well. I like the directness of the French people.
Oh, very good. I like that. And last but not least, Jonathan, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Emily. Good evening, everyone. So my name's Jonathan. I'm a currency dealer for Lumon. We're an international payment specialist. I've been here for 15 of our 24 years of trading. Last year, we turned over about £8 billion worth of currency for our clients. So I've handled international property transactions and the currency payments for a very long time, predominantly in France, as well as a thorough understanding of the French buying process. I'm also very interested in the FX markets and what's going on to move the markets. I was actually once on BBC News talking about the Brexit referendum with Clive Myrie. Ever since that interview, his career's really taken off. What do I love about France? Well, cliche to say the wine and the cheese, but absolutely I do. And just really that pace of life. I'm a keen skier, also love my time on the beach or in the towns. But yeah, just in the mountains, relaxing, the fresh air, the smell of pine, it's fantastic. And yeah, just that pace of life. I actually live in London currently, and I do love London, but yes, obviously you can contrast that with France, just a gentler approach to life. So yes, looking forward to an evening. It's a very interesting time to buy in France. If you're looking at the pound to euro rate, it hit a 2.5-year high very recently, and the US dollar is also very strong against the euro. So more on that later, but yeah, thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Who doesn't like a 2-hour lunch break, isn't it? Right, so let's get on to your questions, because we've received a lot and there's a lot to go through. So I'll start with you, Alice, if that's okay. And if we start from the beginning, which is where to begin with the buying process in France?
So it's a very large topic, of course, where to begin, but we all need to begin somewhere. And my advice in the first instance is, because the area and France itself, of course, but where I am in particular in the south of France is huge. So really to spend some time thinking about location would be my first thing, because there are so many different villages, areas one can look in. So to decide on location, as number one, probably before you start even looking at property, where do you actually want to be? Then of course, secondly, budget. So decide on budget, speak to somebody like Liam if a mortgage is needed, because obviously the rules in France, and Liam can go into more detail on this, but are different to elsewhere in terms of that. So decide on location, decide on budget, and then of course, I would say this, I am an estate agent, but it would likely be helpful to you to speak to an estate agent who can really help you with then putting in place the property search process, because that also can be quite, there's a lot of properties out there, many different websites, etc. So location first, organize budget second, and then third would be speak to an agent who can start to help you in terms of the properties themselves and the search process itself.
I'm going to expand on this. Am I right in saying, obviously in the UK we have 3 major portals where we know that we will find the properties around the UK, and so the search will start here. But am I right in saying that in France it's slightly different? It's difficult to find a portal where you will find all the properties, and actually talking to a local estate agent is probably your best bet to find the properties that you want.
100%, Emily. There, you know, in the UK, I think of kind of Rightmove, I guess, is the main one. There's no such main site in France. There are many different ones, depending on your location within France, depending on budget, depending on all sorts of things. There's a lot of kind of crossover as well. Sometimes properties that are already sold on those sites or no longer for sale. So coming in as a new buyer into the market, it could be quite confusing, as yes, there's not only one place to go to look for properties for sale. So using an agency is definitely helpful, just to kind of understand that first, what is actually available for sale, and have a little bit of focus into your search.
Fantastic. So for the person who asked that question, contact Alice and she will help you with your search. So the next question for you, Alice, is can a buyer negotiate on advertised property prices?
So it's a question we get a lot from buyers, and I would say it's a case-by-case basis. The rule always applies. If a property is priced according to the market, well priced, it will likely sell at price or just under potentially. There are then properties that may have been on the market for a long time. And again, if you're coming fresh into the market, you might not know that. So again, having an agent to guide you on pricing is helpful, so that you know which properties you can negotiate on and which you can't, because it's not a one size fits all. Some properties will sell for asking price or just under, and some you can make offers on, but it is not a one size fits all. So it's about understanding the kind of the properties life on the market at that point, and the values and the market itself at that point.
And also what the vendor wants, and if they're ready to negotiate as well. So that makes sense. And the last one for you is, at what point in the buying process do you need a notary in France?
So the notary is a vital part to the sales process and necessary for the process from the preliminary sales agreement to the acte de vente. There are some agencies that will still do the preliminary sales agreement, which is otherwise known as a compromis de vente or promesse de vente. That is when the notary comes into play in the sales process, and they take over from that point to the acte de vente. Again, some agencies will do that preliminary sales agreement. We as an agency don't. We hand that over to the notary. But yeah, so as soon as you have your offer accepted, the agency will pass the entire file from the seller over to the notary, and the notary takes care of the sales process with the help of the agent, obviously behind gathering documents, etc. But that's when the notary comes into play, as for the kind of entire paperwork sales side.
Fantastic, thank you. Liam, I've got a few questions for you as well, if that's okay. The first one that came is, can you have a mortgage with a French bank without needing to borrow a minimum of 150,000 euros? And the follow-up question to that is, do you need to have a 30% deposit?
I think first and foremost, there might be certain. So in the banking system in France, most of the time it's done regionally. So, for example, if you do a mortgage in Nice, you will pass by the Provence-Côte d'Azur office. It's only sometimes it goes to Paris, and that's typically on the larger deals. So if, for example, you're a non-resident buying a property in Normandy, they may be offering these mortgages around 150,000 euros. Now, we typically don't see banks in the Côte d'Azur, Nice area working with non-residents at that price point, from a simple administration point that, they have, let's say, more straightforward local residents at that price point. However, I think there are certain banks, and I'm quite happy to say it, like Crédit Agricole Britline, who I believe do operate at that price point. Whether they provide the best rate, I'm not too sure. I think it's slightly above where the other banks are at, but they are more open-minded, let's say, to that price point. The 30% deposit is, I would say, or down payment or requirement for the property transaction is really case by case. It depends on the client's creditworthiness. Do they fit the affordability of getting the maximum loan to value possible, which for a UK resident today can be up to 85%. For projects below 1 million euros, above 1 million euros is around 75%. But again, consulting with a mortgage broker early on, you can establish where your LTV is at, your affordability is at, and again, as a feet on the ground broker here in France, we're working with Brits day in, day out, so we can assess. If you want a lower LTV, here's the pricing. If you want a higher LTV, here's the pricing, and again, put forward a strategic repayment plan, which might also be of good fit to the borrower.
Okay, thank you. So in short, depending on where the person is looking to buy, there will be different rules.
Yeah.
So to contact a local mortgage broker effectively, who will give them more information. So 150,000 euros could be valid in Normandy, but might not be so much on the Côte d'Azur where you are at the moment.
Yeah, correct.
Thank
I
you.
mean, there's certain banks who do accept it, but the market has changed quite significantly in the last 2 or 3 years for non-resident applications, notably for Brits because of Brexit.
Right. So what would you advise for Brits wanting to move on the Côte d'Azur then when it comes to mortgages?
If it's Côte d'Azur focused, if it's below.
Oh, we lost Liam.
As I said,
Liam, sorry, we lost you. If you could
as I said,
repeat,
if it's
you could
below
repeat that. We lost you for a bit.
if the property purchase is below 300,000 on the Côte d'Azur as a non-resident Brit, I would say there's only 1 or 2 banking options. So again, you're very limited on who you can go to, which is why, again, from a credit underwriting point of view, it's very important to speak to a broker early on because you have limited products at your disposal.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you is there any way of securing a mortgage at the age of 68?
It goes down to the client's budget. A lot of the private banks can certainly work on this on an interest-only basis, but they typically focus on mortgages which are 1 million euro plus. At 68 years young, if you want to go to a local domestic bank who do not offer interest-only mortgages, they work on an amortization basis, it's going to be highly unlikely. There is, again, always case by case, 1 or 2 private banks or family-owned French private banks who will do this if there's a strong nexus of the client relocating to France, or they're going to open a French company, or there's going to be a wider relationship. But as a black and white question, UK resident at 68 years young, property purchase below 1 million euros, very difficult.
Okay, thank you. And then one last one for you. Are French mortgages obtainable for freelancers? And do I need to spend a certain amount of the year in France?
It's more of I say it's a fiscal question as well. Yes, I mean, you will be deemed by default self-employed by the bank. Even as a French business owner here, I need to provide 2 or 3 years of company accounts with, let's say, relative incomes to get a mortgage. So it's really case by case. I mean, if the freelance worker has 2 or 3 years of accounts in the UK and they're in a transition phase to move to France and open a French company, you can argue with a good broker that here's consistent revenues in the UK, now looking to open an office, let's say, in France, and with a good broker, good presentation, solid potential client base, as in you've got contracts which have been consistent over a number of years, it could work. But let's say, for example, as a freelance photographer with no long-term fixed contracts and no transfer of contracts, it would be quite difficult.
Thank you very much, Liam. That was the last question so far for you. There might be a bit more in the FAQ if we don't lose you in the meantime. So thank you very much, Tom. Over to you. What might be the benefits of becoming French tax resident?
Yeah, very commonly we find that people who buy holiday homes in France end up spending more and more time here, to the extent that they start looking into the idea of living here permanently. And I think the good news is that France can be very tax friendly as a place to live. And that perhaps surprises many people who have this preconception of France as being quite a high tax jurisdiction. Now, that can be true if you're working in France, as some of us on this webinar might be able to confirm. But in fact, the opposite can be true if you're retired or living off investment income, or if simply your income comes from employment outside of France. In those situations, France can actually be one of the most attractive tax regimes in Europe. So very commonly, we're able to demonstrate to second homeowners in France that becoming tax resident here is a good move for them. Not only can you significantly reduce liability to lifetime taxes such as income tax and capital gains tax, but also reduce death duties and inheritance tax for the next generation. And of course, it means that they may spend as much time as they want in France rather than being restricted to 90 days within a 180-day rolling period. Add to that, access to the French healthcare system, which compares really favourably to the UK one, and the general lifestyle and cultural elements of living in France. We're generally finding that more and more people are looking to move their fiscal residency to France. The key, however, is good planning. You can't just move to France and expect to see the benefits straight away unless you've done the necessary preparation before arriving. So it might make sense, for example, to do certain restructuring prior to becoming French tax resident. And of course, that's an area where we can assist and advise.
Fantastic, thank you. And while talking about wealth tax, the next question is on that. Should buyers of French property be concerned about French wealth tax?
We get this question a lot because it's true that France has a wealth tax and that buyers should be aware of it. But the good news is that it has a relatively limited scope, and even those who do fall within its scope will find that there are ways to mitigate against it or even avoid completely a wealth tax liability. So the first thing to note is that the wealth tax applies only to property. Other assets such as cash, investments and bank accounts are completely excluded. And if you're non-resident in France, it applies only to your French property. If you're resident, then it applies to your global property. Now, the relevant threshold is 1.3 million euros. That's the trigger point for when the tax starts to apply. So in theory, if you're buying a property of more than 1.3 million euros, you might have a liability to the tax. But here's where you can use the rules to your advantage. So if you reside in France, you're permitted to deduct 30% from the value of your home for the purpose of the wealth tax calculation. In practice, that means that you can buy a French property of around 1.85 million without a liability to wealth tax, as long as you nominate it as your main residence. And in fact, the French authorities allow you to deduct the balance of a mortgage from the value of the property. So potentially you can avoid the wealth tax by buying with a mortgage. The other point to note is that new residents of France benefit from a 5-year exemption to wealth tax on any non-French property. So if you have a property portfolio in the UK, for example, that will be excluded from the wealth tax calculation for the first 5 years, allowing you the opportunity to plan. Finally, there exists a very useful rule in France that your global taxes should not exceed 75% of your income. And we've used this to great effect to eliminate wealth tax for our clients, because even if a client has a property of, say, 3 million euros or more, we can reorganise their pensions and investments so that they're mostly living off capital. And by reducing their income in this way, the client becomes ineligible to pay the wealth tax, and any liability falls away. So, in short, wealth tax shouldn't be a deal breaker if you're buying in France, as there are many ways to ensure that it doesn't apply. However, as you might have gathered, it does need planning.
It does need planning indeed. So anyone interested in a 2 million plus property with Alice, please talk to Thomas to avoid the wealth tax. Thank you very much. I'll go over to you, Tracy, about visas and residency card and all these things that people are probably thinking about as well because of Brexit and all these things that have happened. So we have a question, which is, I have bought a property in France and I want to move to France, but I'm not yet retired. What visa options do I have?
So yes, a good question, interesting one. And whether you're retired or not is not really an issue. Of course, it doesn't matter if you're not retired, you can move to France. I guess it's the most important point here is to make is that you meet the visa criteria to enter France. And if you move into France to live permanently, or if you just move into France to build flexibility on the 9180, that's another question, obviously, to ask yourself. And if you, as you said, you're not retired yet, does that mean you're going to be wanting to work in France? All of this needs to be clarified, of course, and we can help you with that. Let's just assume then you're going to come to France, you're not yet retired, but you're going to come to France and you're not going to work in France. You have a couple of options. So if you just want to come to spend more time in France and enjoy your property but not become a resident because you are still working back in the UK or wherever it is that you live in, then you could just go for a 6-month tourist visa, which basically allows you to spend 6 months in 12 in France, builds much more flexibility so you don't have to rush off at 90 days. And you can come backwards and forwards and manage your work scenario in the UK. So the 6-month tourist visa is an option, but you would have to renew that every year in the UK. It's not a French renewable visa. It's not extendable in France, and it's certainly not a residency card. So that's one option. Another option, again, I'm assuming here you're not going to work in France, so you could go for the long stay visa, which is a non-working visitors visa that allows you to come in France as a permanent resident but not work in France. And again, that just means you need to meet the criteria. So there's financial criteria along with healthcare cover. And that one, on the other hand, because it's a long stay visa, you're allowed to renew that in France on a yearly basis. If you're saying you're not yet retired and want to move to France and continue to work, it would really depend on whether you're going to be working in France as a salaried person or if you're going to come and bring your business activity here, in which case, of course, then you would need a work or a business visa. And for that type of thing, obviously, it's a whole new ball game. There's more criteria. Obviously, you can reach out to a consulate with us to go through that and make sure your project is clarified before you take a decision on that. So I'm not sure if that's covered the question, but hopefully giving you a few ideas of what you can do.
Thank you very much. I'm sure it has. The next question is, how long will it take to get a residency card and what is the process?
Okay, so usually I advise my clients that you need to count minimum of 3 months to get to the visa. So I'm talking visa, not residency card. People tend to mix up the vocabulary, but visa is what used to come into France, and that takes about 3 months to get from starting the file through to receipt of visa. Okay, that's the first thing. When you come in, when you're going through that process, the process is really, I would say, a 5-step process. You've got the application online, which is slightly different depending which visa you're going for, but it's an online process. Then, of course, you have to book your appointments. The most important step probably for you would be going to the appointment with the documents, the evidence, the proof, if you like, for your file. Then you would come to France with your visa, have it validated and go for your immigration meeting. That's kind of the process in a nutshell. Slightly changes depending on which visa you're going for. but the process itself, when you're applying for visa, is always from country of origin. Then when you come to France, that is when it becomes a residency card. So just the vocabulary can change, but the visa is to come into France. The residency card is once you're in France. Okay.
So get your visa first, and then go to France and get the residency card. And is it a long process then to get that residency card whilst you're in France?
Well, again, it depends, because obviously if you're going for a long stay visitors visa, that's usually the card that people go for when they're not when they're retiring and not going to be working in France. You come in on the visa, but it's the only card that when you come in, it gets stamped. It becomes a residency card within your passport for the first year. So that's the only one that goes that way. If you're applying for a passport talent card, for example, it's 3 months. Once you get into France, literally when you get into France, you have to apply for your residency card online. So that can take anything from another 3 to 6 months once you apply for your residency card online in France. So obviously a few different options you can go for, but the visa itself, you come in with, and then you apply online for your residency card, except for the long stay visitors visa, which automatically becomes a residency card once it's stamped by the immigration office.
Fantastic, thank you.
Complicated. I'm trying to go quickly because I know you've got lots of questions. I want to get through as many.
That's fine. I have the project of moving to France and would like to work independently since Brexit. Is this possible? Will I get healthcare access?
Okay, yeah. So yeah, Brexit has been a big one, and it doesn't stop you moving to France. So please don't stop your projects because of Brexit. Since Brexit happened, we've helped many people move to France. Now, so absolutely it's possible. First of all, obviously discussing the project before you come to France is a good idea. Ensuring your file is correct. So generally speaking, if you have a project where you want to transfer your skill to France, so if you're a consultant or you have a transferable skill, then requesting a liberal visa is a good idea. That's an independent business visa. If you have a very big business project, you can ask for a passport talent visa, which is a little bit more complicated, but gives you a longer residency card. You will have to have a solid business and financial plan to support the activity in France. So going through the same visa process that I just explained, that 5-step process, it's very similar. So it's the same type of process. What changes is the documents you're going to provide. Okay, so for a business project, obviously there are more documents to provide: the financial and business plan, a no criminal record report. You have to have, your business degrees or whatever degree you have in the business that you're going to be in, testimonials and things like that. So obviously we work with people hand in hand to get those projects to go through, because it's important to really work on the project upfront. Takes a bit longer if you're going to be working in France. Any business projects takes a bit longer. The visa takes longer, usually more likely 4 to 6 weeks to get your visa through from the visa centre, rather than 3 to 4 for a non-working visa. So that's it on the business visa. Access to healthcare, I think you said, absolutely you can access to healthcare, and healthcare access is for anybody who is a resident in France. So it's not because you have a business visa that you get access to healthcare. Whether you go for a non-working visa or a business visa, you can request healthcare. The request will go through the CPAM, which is the French healthcare arm in France, CPAM, Caisse Primaire Assurance Maladie. The problem with the CPM is it takes a bit of time. So probably you need to count 4 to 6 months to get your social security number in France. And whilst that is happening, especially if you're elderly, it's good to get private healthcare insurance whilst you're going through the whole process in France. But yes, absolutely possible to get healthcare.
Fantastic, thank you very much, Tracy. Jonathan, a few for you as well. Why would I use a broker over my local bank?
Okay, very good. So the number one reason for using a broker would be exchange rates. It's quite well documented, any sort of buying guide, they often say the bank may not offer the best rates on currency, and that's often true. We do a sort of mystery shopper every month or so, looking at the average sort of Lumon rates versus typical bank rates. Now, within a bank, you know, there's hundreds, thousands of banks globally. You know, you can't sort of benchmark against every single one, and you will get different tiers of rates offered by banks. I think if I explain a bit about how we buy currency, so we buy currency at source. As I mentioned, we turn over about £8 billion worth of currency, and we actually buy from different sources, and we actually have quite a bit of control to an extent over the types of rates that we can buy at. So that gives us a lot more control over the rate. So with, you know, your sort of standard sort of account with a typical bank, as I say, it's sort of 1 to 2 cents, the rate that we get versus some of those average rates. You can get, of course, premier banking, private banking. I'm not going to call out any particular names, but certainly even on some of those better known sort of private banks and, you know, premier accounts, normally we can, very rare, we wouldn't be able to offer a saving on the rates there. And it may only be, you know, if you're talking about 7-figure sums, it may only be a few thousand difference, but again, that's a saving to be made, and that can add up over the lifetime of the property. But it's not just the exchange rate. It's also the service. So we really are currency specialists. I write a lot of blogs about the FX markets, very interested in what's driving currency. We also look at research from about 50 different sources. So where you could be talking to your private banking manager or your bank and some of their own research. So let's just say HSBC, for example, they'll have a dedicated research team on FX, and they'll be able to provide some really, really good information. But that's just one point of view. So we look at 50 different points of view from all the big names in banking, and then we will compile that information to give almost like an average of where the forecasts think rates could go. Now, actually, and I'm quite heavily involved in the company and getting this information together. Actually, when you look at all these different banks and their forecasts, what it really tells you is that no one knows exactly where the market is headed. And it's important to recognize that, contrary to some belief, there's no way you can fully predict the market. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't try to, and we shouldn't look to try and manage the FX aspect, because that's what ultimately will determine what you pay for the property. So yes, it's very much about the service, about keeping clients informed of the market. We'll have a conversation quite early on about strategy. Some people will be very defensive. They don't want to take any risk. They want to lock in the exchange rate nice and early, so they know exactly what the property is going to cost them. Others are more speculative. They may think that the rates are going to go much better, or they just want to give themselves the option to buy at a higher rate if the market does improve. So as I say, we're very proactive, and we'll talk through some of the contract options to try and help manage that FX risk. And it is a risk. You know, we've got the UK budget coming up. There's the US election. So pound euro rates have gone up this year about 5 cents. So that's really good news. Obviously, if you're buying euro, the rate's gone up, but markets can fall away as well. So as I say, it's about managing that risk. Just on that contract options point that I'd mentioned, I think it's worth highlighting the forward contract, where you can actually fix exchange rates for payment in the future. So being totally honest, sometimes if it's a certain private bank who've got a really, really sharp exchange rate they're offering their clients, it might be a fairly similar rate to what we're actually offering them, but they may not offer the forward contract. So the forward contract would allow you to actually keep the money in your bank or keep your money invested, but you can fix an exchange rate for payment in the future. So that's really important. You know, if we're talking these larger 6-7 figure sums of money, you know, you can have your money with someone like Tom, you know, invested, getting a much better return on that, but still locking in the currency aspect, so that once that investment matures and you're looking to actually make the purchase, you know what those euros are actually going to cost you in pounds and pence or dollars, and you're not going to, you know, have all that lovely interest or you know, investment gain wiped out by currency fluctuation. So that's why you would use a broker over the bank. It's number one, the exchange rate. We can demonstrate savings over pretty much any source out there, but it is very much the service and the expertise in managing that risk of the currency markets.
Sounds great. So let's say that there's a really good rate at the moment between the pound and the euro. I can come to you and just say, I want to buy in France I don't know when yet, but I have this sum of money. Can we please lock that for my future purchase? Is that effectively how it works?
Absolutely. I mean, registering is extremely easy. It can be done in a few minutes over the phone or online. And then you've got instant access to a Euro, we call it a wallet. It's actually a Euro client account. So it's very similar to solicitors, other professions who hold money on behalf of their clients, sometimes known as an escrow account. So we can hold euros for clients there instantly. Now, one of the questions I often get asked is if a client doesn't already have a Euro bank account, how do I buy euros with you if I don't have a French bank account yet? And it's actually not the easiest thing in the world to open a French bank account. You can open Euro accounts maybe in your own jurisdiction, but there can be extra complications there with, the international element of moving the money. So in short, to get round that, you can have this Euro wallet set up straight away, and then you can use that to purchase the euros and hold them. So as I touched on, the rate's been very, very good recently. It was actually Friday, just gone. We hit this 2.5-year high. So we had a lot of clients at that time. We highlighted the move to them. They've actually purchased their euros for the property, some of them. Some think the rate's going to get better, and I'll be updating them as I say. But for those who are comfortable with where the rates were able to purchase at those highs, and now we're just holding those euros in this wallet for when they actually need them. So if you're looking at a French purchase, the timescales from, say, compromis de vente to the act, you can be talking a good 2 to 3 months, if not longer, depending on what's actually involved. So you can have those euros bought already, you know exactly what the property is going to cost you. As I say, coming up, we've got the UK budget, the US election, also the Bank of England and the US. They're both predicted to be cutting interest rates literally in 2 weeks' time. So we've got a huge amount going on in the market. Like I said earlier, even these experts don't know exactly what the predictions are. Well, they know their predictions, they don't know what the rate's precisely going to do. So to navigate that uncertainty, you can lock in the rate, you know what everything costs you, and then you can actually make your payments from that wallet. And just on that point, that's actually a lot easier. So if you had, say, 500,000 euros in the wallet there, and you need to make a payment to a notaire, it's just a simple email to us. We then have some security checks with you over the phone. Then the euros, the exact amount you need for the notaire, are in that notaire's account same day or within 24 hours. Now, if you've got €500,000 in a French bank and then you need to move some of that to the notaire, there can be some extra steps. You might have to book an appointment with the French bank. There could be forms, paperwork potentially to fill out. So once again, it's very much about that service and just making things easy and streamlined.
Sounds great. And actually, one of the questions is there a cost for using your service?
Not in the sort of typical sort of expectation of a bill at the end, perhaps with, say, solicitors' fees or something like that, where you'd get a bill at the end. So Lumon make money on the difference between the buy and the sell price when we're doing a currency exchange, but it's very transparent. We tell you exactly what the rate is that we can trade at for you, and that is 100% your return. So recently the rate's been 1.2. If you're lucky enough to be trading at that point on £100,000, that would be 120,000 euros, and every cent of that is your money. So if you had 120,000 euros in the wallet, as I say, every cent of that is yours. If you paid out 50,000 from that to the notaire, you're going to be left with 70,000 in the wallet. And again, every cent of that is yours. So there's no sort of international payment fees, transaction charges, hidden fees here or there. It's all extremely transparent, and it's totally free of charge to register as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Right, I'm going to go quickly on to some FAQs then, if that's okay, from people who've asked a question. And again, apologies, I'm aware of time, so we won't be able to go through all of them, but the expert will come back to you after the webinar as well and answer some of those questions. Alice, one from you, I'll put one into two if that's okay, which is, can you please confirm the process of buying in France and what are the technicalities of buying a property in France as a foreigner? So maybe if we go through the process as a foreigner.
So first and foremost, I guess it's important to just say that as foreigners, there's no restrictions on buying property in France. Anyone can buy property in France, of course, if they're not from a blacklisted country, but otherwise, in general, you can buy property in France. The buying process, I'm going to presume that means once a property is found, because there's also this before that, but once the property is found, the buyer will make an offer on the property. Once the offer, and that's done through the agent, once the offer is agreed with the seller and agreed on paper, the file will be sent by the agent with all supporting documents to the notary. At this point, it is not binding on the buyer, it's a show of faith and an agreement of basic terms between buyer and seller, basic conditions, including price, for example, you know, all the basic things. Once it's at the notary then establishes a draft sales agreement, or what's called a compromis or a promesse de vente. You've heard it a few times during the webinar. That is drafted by the notary, signed by buyer and seller. The buyer has a 10-day cooling off period after signing. The seller does not benefit from that same cooling off period. Once those 10 days are over, it is a binding contract on both parties, at this point the buyer included, unless they have a suspensive clause for a bank loan and for whatever reason they do not achieve the bank loan. At this point, the buyer will also pay a deposit into escrow at the notary. It's not an agency, for example, that keeps the deposit. The deposit goes to the notarial account of normally between 5 and 10%. And then between that signature of the compromis de vente and the acte de vente is normally about 2 to 3 months. It depends, because there is a preemption right of the town in France. So it applies almost everywhere. And then the final sale agreement is signed, which is the acte de vente. That's when transfer of funds takes place and there's handover of keys, etc. So it's about a 3-month process from offer agreed, going to the notary with the promesse de vente or compromis de vente, and signing the final acte de vente about 3 months later. So I hope that answers the question.
It does, thank you. And is there any difference between being a French citizen and not being a French citizen in buying in France, or is the process the same for everyone?
No, the process will be the same for everybody. Yeah.
Fantastic, thank you. Tom, there are quite a few questions of taxes, inheritance tax and capital gains liabilities. So there's a question which is, having bought a property, what can you do to reduce your capital gains liability in the future?
I think one very simple thing you can do if you bought a property, if you want to be able to sell it tax-free, is simply live in it. If a property becomes your main residence, we have a rule in France that the main residence is never subject to capital gains tax. So, you know, if you bought a property in France, you've made a nice gain on it. One of the things that you can do is move to France, make it your main home, and then sell it tax-free. There's no kind of minimum time period. I mean, we generally advise that, you know, to make sure it is legitimate residency, you should maybe live in the property for 18 months before you sell it. But it's literally the case that once you're resident there, if you sell it, there's no tax to pay. So that would be the way to go about it, I think.
I mean, that could be worse, you know, moving to France and living there for 18 months, you know, I mean, that's fine. Thank you. And so the next one is, what are the implications of buying a permanent home in France regarding inheritance tax? How to structure a property purchase so it does not fall under French inheritance law?
Yeah, okay. So it's actually quite difficult to avoid French inheritance tax on a French property. There's a lot of planning that you can do with other assets, investments, cash, pensions, and so on. But when it comes to property, physical property, there isn't really very much that you can do. You can divide a property up so that it has several owners. You can buy jointly if you're in a couple. that does increase the allowances that you can pass on to the next generation. But really, if you're moving to France and you're concerned about inheritance tax, your focus should really be on what you should do with the other assets that you have.
Okay, thank you. Alice, another one on taxes. How much do American citizens pay in annual property tax for a vacation home, non-rental versus a rental one? So American taxation.
So it wouldn't be different, and I'm talking about the French property for Americans or anybody else. There are, and the taxes are not as high as I think people might expect. There is 2 annual taxes for owning a property in France. One is called the taxe foncière, and then the second one is for secondary residences, since just recently for secondary residences, and that is called the taxe d'habitation, the habitation tax. So there's those 2 annual taxes. To give you an example, if we're talking about, for example, a 2 or 3 bedroom, very nice apartment in Cannes, for example, of 100 square meters, you might pay about €1,500 tax foncière and just slightly more than that habitation tax per year. So a total of, for example, about 4,000 a year. For those 2 taxes. And then if you rent the property, of course, you will have income tax on the rental. And otherwise, that's it. There's nothing kind of in particular for US citizens. There is the additional tax for secondary residences, but it's not as high as people may think, in fact.
And it's for everyone.
And it's for everybody. It's if you're French as well as residents, you'll also pay the habitation tax.
Well, that's great. Let me have a look. Tom, I think that one was against you as well. Are there likely to be increases in tax for UK buyers in France over the next 12 to 18 months?
I don't think so. We've just had the French budget, actually, and there's nothing in there that I've spotted. Maybe, I don't know if Alice, if you spotted anything, but I don't think there's anything in there that stands out as causing concern to potential buyers in France. There have been some changes to taxes on investments. They've not been voted through yet, but in theory from next year there'll be some minor changes to how investments are taxed. But really nothing that should put anybody off moving to France. It's still, if you organise things in a certain way, you can really minimise the effect of those taxes. So it becomes not so much of a concern. So no, in short, I don't think there's anything.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm looking at some of the questions that are coming through as well. Maybe one for you, Tracy. Do we expect to see any relaxation of the 90 days rule for Brits?
I would love to say yes, but it's going to be a big no. There's going to be no relaxation on that 9182 rule. It's not something they can do. So actually, if that is a big problem for you, it's not really a problem. Just go for a 6-month visa. It takes all of the problem out of that direct 90-day. Take a 6-month tourist visa, gives you more flexibility.
Fantastic. And so same person actually asked after that, does it make any difference to the house buying process if you're a regular non-visa holder versus being a visa holder or resident?
Absolutely not. Whether you're a resident or a non-resident, you obviously can buy a property. That's not an issue at all. And you don't need to have a visa to buy a property in France. Obviously, Alice will go back and say the same thing, no doubt. So it's not a visa. The only thing you need to have a visa if you want to spend more than 90 days. And again, 6-month visa is your flexibility visa if you don't want to be a resident. So not a problem at all.
Thank you. Maybe actually, so yes, we will send the recording, by the way, don't worry. So another one for maybe you, Tracy. How do the French define retired? Can you be retired and still do some freelance work outside France?
So no, you can't. There is no such thing as what people reach out to me, nomad visas in Spain, and they confuse Spain and France, and you can't work freelance in France without a appropriate visa. That's a no-no. So retired, that's why I said at the beginning, retired or not retired, it's not really the issue. That's, you know, people retire at different ages. Some people never retire. So if you're living in France as a resident and you have a business activity in the UK, let's say, if you're popping back to the UK and doing that business activity once a month, or every, you know, if you're a shareholder, you need to go to your meetings, not a problem. It can be, you know, semi-retired, or, you know, have a non-working visa in France. If you have an activity in the UK and you want to come in France and live and do remote work from France for that business, then no, you have to then request the appropriate visa. So you could do a freelance in a liberal visa I discussed briefly earlier, and transfer that to France. So you can't just, you know, I'm not saying people don't necessarily do a little bit of odd work here and there when they're on holiday. We all get on our phones on the beach and do a bit of work. But from a legal perspective, you want to be living in France but working, you have to require the visa to go with it.
Fantastic. I think, Thomas, another one that was a follow-up on capital gain tax. But if you move into the property to take advantage of the capital gain tax exemption, might you not get hit with other taxes? Surely a question of looking at the whole picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Very important. You know, I wouldn't advise anybody to leap headfirst into French tax residency. There's a lot to consider. So, you know, of course, if you move to France and make it your main home, you're then potentially on the hook for French income tax, French capital gains tax, as we discussed, wealth tax, succession tax on your global estate. But as I said earlier, what we often find is that those taxes, or the effect of those taxes, may be less than the effect of the UK taxes if a person decides to stay in the UK. So absolutely, it does need proper investigation and consideration, but it isn't necessarily a bad thing.
I mean, in the end, the whole reason for this webinar is to say, talk to an expert. If you're looking at a move, talk to an expert, and they will look into your particular case and help you, really. I'm conscious of time, but I'll ask one last question to Alice, if that's okay, which is, what type of properties and what locations along the coast of the Côte d'Azur offer the best return on investment?
I would say, in my personal opinion, Cannes in the first instance. I mean, there are other options, but Cannes has a unique advantage in that it has a very strong short-term rental market because of the congresses. So we have many congresses, including the Cannes Film Festival, of course, which is the best, the most well-known of them. But there are many others where there is simply not enough hotel accommodation, and therefore there's a spillover to apartments. So there are peaks in short-term rentals throughout the year, and then of course you have summer as well. It's a highly sought-after summer destination. So whereas there are other places on the coast that for short-term rentals, if people are buying secondary residences and want to use the property themselves and benefit from the use of the property but have an income from it, yeah, Cannes offers not only holiday rentals and summer rentals, which other towns also offer, but also congress rentals, so the Cannes congresses. So that's in general, not talking about long-term rentals, but short-term rentals. It's an interesting market for investment, particularly in the central location where our office is, which is called the Banane, the centre. There are excellent high rental returns.
Fantastic. And is it something that you can help with, short-term rentals as well, in case someone is interested?
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Rentals management, all of that. We've been doing it for many years now, and yeah, I'm specialised in that side of things as well.
Cool. Thank you very much. Wow. 1 minute to 7. That's pretty good. I'm really sorry we haven't gone through all the questions. There have been many more questions which I haven't been able to go through, but as I said, the panel will receive all your questions and will contact you individually as well to answer these questions and help you move and buy in France, which is very exciting. It's been amazing to have you all. Thank you very much for your time. Have I missed anything, Jonathan, for today?
No, you've been a fantastic host, Emily. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, everyone. We'll share the recording. We'll share everybody's contact details. And good luck to everyone for your move to France.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.